All right, greetings. Can't say good morning. Well, it is
Hey,
actually good morning to you. Is what one
yeah, it's about 1:30 in the morning here in beautiful West Cairo. We are here. A lot of Nubians here among the folk. Tanya Pinkins is here. Tanya's here.
is she?
Tanya made it from the biannual Black Theater Festival in North Carolina. She made it back to JFK and flew out with us, and so
Oh
we're here
wow,
in we're here
wow.
in the Nile Valley. Yeah, a lot
Tell
of
her hello, definitely. So tell us, describe the plane ride and what what you flew into and what is it like right now. Walk us through.
Well, we split up. Part of the group left out of John Foster Dulles in Washington, and the other part left out of John F. Kennedy in New York. We came in the day before and spent the day in the city. Got a chance to go by the New York Public Library, which has a fantastic exhibit right now of treasures in the New York Public Library, and including some pages from the archives of James Arthur Baldwin. And the second, actually, yesterday was Baldwin's birthday. Actually, today, and still there in the U.S. On the East Coast, and it was a beautiful time. Got a chance to spend some time looking at some things. Actually, there's a beautiful statue that we were able to see. I'd never seen it in person. Folks may be familiar with the sculptress Meta Warwick Fuller, and the New York Public Library has a copy of some of her work, and she's got a beautiful piece she did in 1921 called Ethiopia Awakening. And it's a black woman with a pharaonic headdress. It's probably about 5 feet tall, if I had to estimate. And in 1921, she created this artwork to symbolize the contributions of African people to the development of the U.S. And for those who know Meta Warwick Fuller, of course, born in 1877, made transition in 1968. By then, she was the height of her powers, 1921. And it was a good thing to be able to stumble upon that at the 42nd Street branch of the New York Public Library. If you ever get a chance, go to 42nd Street and Fifth Avenue. You should do that.
Is that the
See
one
this
with Patience and Fortitude, the lion?
patience, patience and fortitude. The lions who guard the library between the lions, as the story, as the children's series used to go. Of course, those two lions, those two stone lions, who have appeared in so many pop culture references. I think Ghostbuster Frozen Empire, I think, is the last time they appeared when they were animated and brought to life by the spirits that the Ghostbusters had to kill, whatever. But yeah, and they were named, of course, as probably a lot of people know, by Fidel LaGuardia, Mayor LaGuardia, that talked about the spirit of the people of New York and how it was important for people to have patience and fortitude, and how reading and study gives people patience and fortitude, and that's very true. It can steer you to the vagaries of the future. But Ethiopia Awakening is just a beautiful piece. The lower half of the statue is is encased like a saku, what the Egyptians would call a saku, the people of Kemet, or what we would call a mummy. And so it's the wrappings. The feet are bound up through the calves and the thighs, and then the rest of the body, as she's standing, kind of looking, is a woman of African descent, Ethiopia Awakening, and it's kind of a gesture. In fact, the period, the piece is considered by some art scholars as the first quote unquote Pan African work of art. Of course, that's not true. If you think of it, depending on how you define Pan African. By 1921, of course, there had been a couple of Pan African congresses, one in 1919 in Paris, and then subsequent ones 1921, and then going forward with the biggest one being the fifth Pan African Congress in Manchester, England, all supported, co-convened by, participated in by W.E.B. Du Bois. And so to see that, which was kind of, I would say, it was guided by the ancestors, it was serendipitous. Didn't expect to see it, just happened to stumble upon it because when walking past the 42nd Street Library, we saw a poster for these treasures from the library collection, the library system collection, which included a lot of stuff from Schomburg, which were included in this exhibition on the first floor. And we went in because it had a picture of one of the replicas of the famous kind of stair step looking people in a line in the form of like a harp, Lift Every Voice and Sing, which is of course the famous sculpture that was prepared for the World's Fair by Augusta Savage. So we went in looking for the Augusta Savage and ended up seeing a whole lot of stuff. The poster and liner notes from The Wiz, and like I said, clippings from James Baldwin's file and some of his original drafts for some of his novels and essays. Maya Angelou, pages from her handwritten pages from her memoir. I know why the cage birds sing, but the highlight was Ethiopia Awakening. They have her in a glass case, and it's just so beautiful and so striking to be able to see this piece by this sister just as we got ready to travel. So next morning, we all left from John F. Kennedy, left from Kennedy Airport. A lot of Nubians, a lot of Octavia Butler shirts and Kazi is the blackest of all shirts, and all kind of Nubian gear. And sitting there, we checked in, kind of waited to make sure everybody got through, and we were in contact with Dr. Beatty, who led the group coming out of DC. And as we did, there were a number of pilgrims in the airport, Muslims who were headed actually over here, flying on the same flight we were, Egypt Air, but transferring in Cairo to head to Saudi Arabia. There's a big Muslim ritual taking place, and it's very interesting because you see everybody clad in Muslim dress, the women and men, and as we was kind of sitting there, we had checked in, and so now we're kind of sitting, and folks were coming by. Good morning, hey, how you doing? So one brother said, hey brother, how you doing? I said, oh, where y'all headed? Oh, we're going to this ritual, and he named the ritual. The name escapes me at this moment. Oh, where you from? Oh, from Philly. I said, you from Philly? Oh, I used to live in Philly. That's kind of like my adopted hometown. We got to talking, and they were part of a group of Black folk from the United States who were headed there. And just the beautiful diversity of Blackness. The people working, of course, New York is, John Clark would call it, a multi-ethnic nation. So seeing people from all over, even the white people ain't white in that sense. People from all over the world, frankly, and to see the convening. Oh, and it's interesting, we were in Grand Central Station, and since the last time we traveled, I'd never gone to JFK from Grand Central Station. So we were in there to get directions to make sure we knew where we were going, kind of just to confirm we knew, but I always like to talk with people. And somebody said, Dr. Carr. And in the Grand Central Station information kiosk, the round kiosk there in the middle of Grand Central Station, brother came out, a Nubian. He said, we with you every Saturday. Really? Oh man, that's a beautiful thing. Hold on for a second. I'll tell you his name in a minute, because it was so beautiful when we came in that let me see if I can find his name. It'll I'll get it in a minute. But it was really quite something, because to be able, oh, here he is, Jerome Spates. So shout out to Jerome Spates, who is coming up, I think, on his 37th year of working for New York City Transit and working in the train station. And he actually walked us down to the Long Island Railroad, talking the whole time about looking forward to opening up a career as a teacher, as he kind of continues in his journey and thinks about what he wants to do next after retiring. And he talked about training young people and working, using sports as a conduit for education, but wanting to go in the classroom. And then another young brother passed him. People who work in a space, who've worked there for some time, know everybody. So I'm like, man, do you know everybody in Grand Central Station, this huge place? Everybody's waving at him. Hey, what's going on, bro? Hey, Jerome, hey, how you doing, bro? And this young brother came up. He was walking past us. He said, hey, man, is that Dr. Carr? Yeah. He said, man, he turned me on to y'all. And so I watch you with Karen all the time. I'm telling you, what we are a part of is really indescribable. It really is, in terms of this kind of global network. Folk here in the Nile Valley, folk all over the U.S. and beyond. So it was a peaceful journey, good journey, no problems. We've flown Egypt there many
I
times.
was gonna say, how many years have you been taking this trip?
Well, that is well, my first time in Kemet or Egypt was 1996, and we of course came with the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilizations, ASCAC, and the journey was led by a lot of folks who are ancestors now: Asa Hilliard, Jacob Carruthers, and Zinga Radabisha Heru. John Henry Clark by then wasn't able to make it, but he sent his paper for the ASCAC conference, which we held actually in the Senate chambers of the Ghanaian government in Accra. And we were hosted by then President J.J. Rawlings, who's also now an ancestor, president of Ghana. And Dr. Clark sent his paper by another now ancestor, the great Anderson Thompson, with instructions that I read it, that it be given to me to read. And so I read Dr. Clark's paper. Actually, if you go out on the internet, if you go to the Atlanta University Center archives, the video of that session, which was Dr. Carruthers and me, has actually been digitized and is available. If you go to the Atlanta University Center and look up in the Asa Hilliard papers, the 1996, 1995, the 1996, I think, ASCAC convention in Accra, Ghana, you'll see me about 50 pounds lighter. But I ain't been eating, reading. I'm still in graduate school, so reading Dr. Clark's paper, and so that's who we went with. The travel agency we went with, Consolidated Tours, is still the one we go through today. Moses Hanania, the founder of that travel agency, became an ancestor 6 years ago on Saturday, on the 3rd. His daughter Mary now runs the organization. She and her mother are here. Just fantastic people, and have been responsible for journeys to the Nile Valley and other places in Africa and Latin America, in the Caribbean. African people going all over the world, quite frankly, and it's really been a journey.
What did you expect the first time? And what did you actually walk away with? Like, what was the life-changing or life-altering or perspective-altering moment from that first trip?
I expected to be overwhelmed, and that expectation was met. That's a great question. Um, as a graduate student at that time, who had by then, for the better part of 10 years, been immersed in study of African people, really since I started law school back in '87. Um, between the fall of 1987, when I started law school, in 1996, June 1996, when we traveled to Ghana. No, it was June. It wasn't June 1996. It was June 1995. It was 1996, 1995. What I had the fortune, and this is really something that's important for, particularly for young people, but for everyone really. When you're reading and you're studying, and people you are studying or learning from are still around, you should reach out to them. So by then I've been in Philadelphia for 3 years after having been in Columbus, Ohio for half a decade, studying with the study group collective around the African Center for Study and Worship. Of course, Baba Mariba Kelsey being the leader, he and his wife, Mama Niabi Kelsey. And I expected to be given more responsibility, because when you're in a group that's intergenerational, and I'm very excited about the fact that we have a handful of teenagers here today, several young men and several young women who are traveling with their parents, who are here. And so this intergenerational thing is very, very beautiful. It's beginning to emerge. And so we were young, And in these study formations, we were expected to be given assignments, and that's what we were doing. You need to study this, you need to look this up, you need to contribute this to the conversation. And so by the time we came to go to Ghana and Egypt, because those were the two places, we had the conference in Ghana, and then we went on to Egypt with the group. We were being given more responsibility. So I expected to be overwhelmed by the sheer just immensity of Kemetic civilization, of African civilization, and I was. We arrived at night, and the next morning we woke up, and you walk outside, and you see across the highway in the distance the pyramid of Khufu, the Great Pyramid. And it's one thing just to read about it or see it in film, or when you're literally standing in the yard of, we were at the Mina House Hotel, which is still around, in the shadow of the pyramids, and you see this huge pyramid, and you realize this isn't theoretical. We know it's real, but then you become overwhelmed, and every day was just subsequently being overwhelmed. And then you're in the company of these great elders and these scholars who are first-rate intellectuals, but also deeply grounded in the community. Then you feel this really awesome responsibility to carry it on. And some of those people that we travel with are still around, elders themselves who are doing this work. And then many of them are ancestors. And so to be entrusted by generations before you to say, when we're gone, this is the work that you must carry on. And while we're here, this is the work we will do together. That's how you institution build. And that's what we've been doing. Yeah.
What was the work?
Well, the work is, it's interesting you say that, because we talked about this in office hours a little bit on Monday night this week. Over the years, and since that first trip, we came back in 2007. And between then, and done some traveling. And by then I was working at Howard. So in 2007, I led the first study abroad that we did at the College of Arts and Sciences at Howard, and took students to South Africa, and co-led, going a couple of years before, and then came back in 2007 and took students, and then came back to the United States, and then went back to Africa, to Egypt that year. And that's the year, of course, Asa Hilliard made transition in the Nile Valley. And the following year took students again in 2008, 2009, 10, a couple more years. And then the last trip we did with students was 2019, and COVID hit. And then by then, been able to get our friends and colleagues, Mario Beatty, Valencia Watkins at Howard. And so now we're doing it with a much larger group, of formation of adults, going beyond. We've jailbroken the university. But in between those times, the expectation of the responsibility really then pumped into this concept of the work, as you say. And what is the work, as you ask? And no, but for those who might not understand, because people talk about this time, you got to do the work, do the work, do the work. Well, it really depends on what your objective is. And if we think about that, I've been thinking about that a lot, because the work that I'm talking about specifically as it relates to coming here and doing this deep study, and then emptying it into this question of studying together and working together to effect change, there are a couple of dimensions that I can readily identify. Part of the work is grounding yourself in deep study. In other words, beginning to understand how African people have lived in the world over time, not over decades, but over millennia, over thousands of years and thousands of years, and how that living has been kind of codified, reduced to memory, and then passed on from generation to generation, so that people can get a sense of how to live and be in the world. What are the best ways? What are the ways that aren't so good that we've learned from? What are the best ways that allow us to think about being in the world and move forward in the world as humans to ever greater life, not as African people, not as Europeans or Asians, or any of these labels that have emerged over the last half millennia or so, so-called modern world system social structure, but how do we live as humans in the world? So that's one of the two things in terms of the work. And then the other part of the work is removing obstacles to doing that work. And removing obstacles is the thing I think I'm most grateful for in terms of what we've been doing here. Really invites people to do that work and study by making sure we all know that we can do it. And all we have to do is undertake that work. That removes the mystery that many societies are based on. The hierarchical thing that says you have to have a college degree, or you have to be a scholar in a certain way. You have to do that kind of work. That's not true. That's absolutely not true. And because it's not true, that isn't enough for it not to be true. You got to be able to model that, demonstrate that, receive that. And like our journey now, we took it a little smaller this year to see how that would feel. Last year, this time we were here with about 220 folk. We're here now with about half that number. Still a big group and very diverse group of people, different group than last year, but very similar in terms of a lot of Nubians, a lot of folk from every conceivable different walk of life. That work, then the work of doing that deep study and the connecting, and that work of removing obstacles to doing that deep study, then leads to a third dimension. That'll be the other one I'll mention. The work becomes building institutions to empower ourselves and others to have that fuller life. So, there are those who, of course, will be convened with you in South Carolina. I wish I could be there for Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise. I wish I could miss that. But it's the same work.
I was going to say, and it's around the same number of people, smaller than January.
Yes.
And we're going to be, Daniel Black's, of course, going to be doing that, adding Corey Alston and Sun Michaud, Michael Harriet, but it's again convening, coming together in community to remember. There's a lot of conversation around what it means to be Black with the challenging of Kamala Harris's Blackness. And it's so weird. This is weird. It's weird that that's become like, I thought everybody knew that, even saying she had a grandparent or great grandparent that owned slaves. I was like, enslaved people. I was like, are we that dumb? Like, are we having this conversation? Have we never had it? Like, I thought, even white folk knew that the miscegenation that happened on plantations was by force, right? And that most of us who are not, who have different variations of brown and coffee au lait is at the hands of rapists primarily, and that's not the flex you think it is. Like they use that as an attempt to insult her, right? Or to say she's not really Black because one of her great grandparents. I was like, yeah, probably one of mine too. Guess what?
Right.
We're doing that. But
Right.
it just stunned me how ignorant we are in this country and maybe in the world. And watching the Olympics, hearing people say, "Oh, the first Black." And I'm like, no, the lady from Guadeloupe was Black that won fencing before. The Rebecca Andrade from Brazil is Black. The French guy that just won the judo 4 years in a row is Black from Guadeloupe as well. Half all of the basketball teams pretty much, and all of the track and field teams are Black, because you created whiteness. Now we are everywhere. And so I just think of that.
That's a it's very interesting because obviously we can't go back in time. We live in the world that exists. To think of a better world, to imagine a better world, it's funny, in one of the chapters of Clyde Taylor's book, The Mask of Art, there is a quote, I think it's from Jean Genet's play, The Blacks. And of course, as we've talked about many times, Clyde Taylor's book, The Mask of Art, is about disabusing ourselves of master narratives that trap us, confine us, and break what he would call breaking the contract with whiteness, with the invisibility of whiteness that shapes how we think about ourselves, which really is talking about race and these kind of artificial constructs that are nevertheless have very real world consequences. And beginning this chapter, um, there are two characters arguing in the chapter about how best to go forward in this battle, and one of them says, um, the first thing we have to do in this battle is take care of the wounded, and the other character says the first thing we have to do is dispatch with make believe.
Mm.
Yeah, that's true. When we think about taking care of the wounded, I think it's a metaphor for living from day to day, from getting involved in the kind of comings and goings. So we talk about, contemporary politics. Obviously, we see what's going on in the U.S. with elections. And as we talked about at the beginning of the year, in 2024, there will be elections in over half of the countries of the world. And we've seen that unfold in India and South Africa. We've seen that unfold in Mexico, and we're seeing it unfold in the United States. We saw it unfold in France and England. We saw it unfold in Venezuela. And we see how people contest. And that metaphor, the first thing to do is take care of the wounded. It's like, here are the real world comings and goings, interferences and delays, obstructions and fights and organizing and protest that are attendant to the modern world system, a fracturing system of nation states that is coming apart in front of our eyes. Talk about ignorance. A lot of times, just in living from day to day, we lose sight of the larger rhythms that if we were just to take a moment and look at the rhythms and patterns, we have better information on how to go back and forth in the world. So there's that. But when the other character says, first thing we have to do is dispatch with make believe, what they're saying is we have to be able to recognize not only the world as it is, but the reality that lays behind the world as it is. Because a lot of times when we think it's something in the world that exists, it's a narrative. It's a narrative, which is why all these, mass commercial entertainment media driving these conversations about elections. Well, people polled, so and so has pulled ahead in the race. No one has voted. Nobody pulled ahead in the race.
Mm-hmm.
There's a narrative you've created to keep this thing ginned up because you have an objective. So the first thing we have to do is dispatch with make believe. Because once you, as people will say, and you've talked about this many times in terms of polls, and Clay has talked about it, so many others have talked about it, Marie has talked about it, polls don't gauge opinion, polls shape opinion. And so you're creating a narrative. Clyde Taylor would say you got to break that master narrative. And so part of that work of enabling us to do the work by dispatching with these things that tell us we can't do it is identifying how we've done it in the past. And so, as I said, on Monday night in office hours, we were talking because in the times that I've traveled to Africa or, places in Africa or Brazil or Europe or any place with folk, or even domestic here in the United States, going places with folk. When I travel, I'll pack my clothes and toiletries, the things everybody takes when they travel. And I'll pack that in the bag. And if I'm checking that bag, I always say, that's the bag that if I never see it again, it doesn't matter. And when it shows up on the other side, hey, great, this is great. I got my bag. Let's keep going. But the bag I take with me on the plane, train, wherever, that bag is my working bag. So, of course, I've got, my laptop, the iPad, the electronic stuff, because one of my responsibilities has been, since I've been leading or co-leading Study Abroad, certainly with Dr. Beatty, is I take care of the electronic stuff for the presentation. So I got every kind of gadget and wire and connector. So we don't have I got one. That's the projector, not a problem. We take that. And so after I've done that, I then decide what reading material am I going to take. So I'll usually take an Egyptian grammar, and I've got my electronic version. I don't do ebooks, but I left my physical copy of James Allen's Egyptian grammar just to have it handy. Because one of the things we do, which distinguishes our work with a lot of other work in the Nile Valley, is, a lot of people have taken or are taking Meta Nature with Dr. Beatty in Nubia, and we're constantly grappling with this question of language. And of course, he's the finest scholar of the language that we have, and one of the finest teachers of it anywhere. And so, we're doing that. And then I had to decide, what books am I going to take? What physical books I'm going to take? And I thought, and what I'm doing, we just got here. So we got here yesterday. Tomorrow we head out to deal with the Old Kingdom here in the Giza area. That would be the major pyramids that everybody knows, Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure from the Old Kingdom of Kemet. Takes you back about 4,500 years. There's no Greece, there's no Rome, there's no England or France, there's no boats coming up to snatch you and take you anywhere else. the major activity in terms of human civilization is taking place in Africa, and much of it is here in the Nile Valley. So, we'll go to the mastaba, the burial kind of structures for Ptahhotep, Kagemi, Teti, the Pyramid of Teti, where we'll look at the pyramid texts. These are anchor notions of classical Africa, the culmination of conversations that began in inner Africa, in Uganda, in Ethiopia, converging into Sudan with the White and the Blue Nile meeting, and then emptying into the Mediterranean. So we're in that conversation. But in doing that work, rather than take a lot of books on Egypt and materials on Egypt, I decided I'm going to spend this 2 weeks thinking very seriously about this question of how we narrate ourselves and our lives, because we have become trapped by race. The first thing we have to do is get rid of make-believe, dispatch with make-believe. And so in office hours on Monday night, we had a lively conversation. Brother Adesoje out of the UK, Nigerian by the way out of the UK, was trying to make the argument that I should leave a book that I mentioned last week. Zainab Badawi's book, An African History of Africa, was recently published. And if you all watch her multi-part series from the BBC on African history, it's on YouTube. You can look at it. All the sessions are there. I think it's a very viewer-friendly narration of Africa, primarily with African people who live in the various countries. She went to over 30 countries, scholars, many of them African scholars from the continent of Africa, that is. And so, ultimately I decided to leave the book, not necessarily because I thought the arguments were so compelling, but I did think that the conversation was the most important thing to talk about, the narrative framework. But I said maybe, and the reason I was going to take the book was not so much to get a broader understanding of African history, because the book wouldn't do that for me. I kind of know the areas that she's covering, but to get a sense of the narrative. How are we narrating Africa? Because we're still narrating it by country. We're still thinking about it in ways that trap us in many ways. And I thought that she does an interesting job. Her perspectives were forcing me to think about things and maybe even rethink in some ways. But I decided to ultimately leave it there because now I'm talking about a very small number of books. And so I decided to take books that would make me think about how we narrate ourselves as African people. A couple of them are, well, all of them are rereads with one exception. As it relates to classical Africa, I took a book that's very critical of how we think about classical Africa, how African people have thought about Africa. Africans called History in Black, African Americans in Search of an Ancient Past by Yaakov Shavit. Yaakov Shavit was a professor at the time at the University of Tel Aviv. And he's written a book. This book is just over 400 pages. It was published about just a little over 20 years ago, 2001, on what he would call the foundations of so-called Afrocentric universal history. So how do these people who have been labeled as Afrocentric, although most of them wouldn't call themselves that, thought about Egypt, thought about Ethiopia, thought about the Nile Valley, thought about Kush, and thought about every place from India to Ethiopia, and talked about Native Americans and others. How have they looked for African people in world history, as John Clark might say? He's very critical of many of these folks who have done this work, this teaching and learning, this writing. And so I'm rereading it because it's a reminder of how political history can be. And I wanted to sit with that here in the Nile Valley and think about how reasonable people can disagree, how people have political agendas that inform how they do this search, and how race traps us, how the illusion of race traps. I have no interest in fighting with whiteness. It's a trap. I have no interest in, although I'm well familiar with academics, we call it the field of whiteness studies, everybody from David Rodiger to David Theo Goldberg and many others writing about this question of whiteness and blackness. I haven't completely lost interest in it because our people are trapped by it, and you got to grapple with it. The people are trapped by it because the first thing, as I said, is the dispatch with make believe. That's what that Africana Studies framework is for. That's why we developed that concept of the social structure. Who are Africans to other people? That's where race lives. And so much of our conversation is about whiteness and white people and how do we get pushed back against whiteness and how do we resist. And okay, that's all very important. James Baldwin does a lot of that work, but I wanted to grapple with the question of how we get beyond that. So I'm rereading this, but I'm rereading it against a recent ancestor, Wilson Jeremiah Moses. As we talked about Wilson Moses, who made transition a little while ago this summer. It's called Afrotopia, the Roots of African American Popular History, Wilson Moses. And Wilson Moses, very good brother, as I talked about, we talked about him the week when he made transition. And this work talks about the same subject Yaakov Shabbat talks about, but he focuses, Professor Moses, that is, he focuses on, he has a different narrative take on that. So he's talking about how did Frederick Douglass grapple with the question of race and antiquity. We know Edward Wilmot Blyden, who stood in the great hall of the pyramid that we'll stand in tomorrow, Khufu's pyramid. And while there, he wrote in an essay he published in the 19th century called From West Africa to Palestine, kind of a travelogue. He says, as I was standing in that pyramid in the chamber, he said, feeling came over me that was unique in my life. I'd never had a feeling like this. And I know that's how I felt when I came here in the mid-90s, standing in the chamber of that pyramid with these giants of teachers and learners, my elders and Jagners. Edward Blyden said, I stood there in that pyramid and I said to myself, I wish at that moment that every African in the world could have heard my voice. And he said, if I could have reached every African in the world, I would have recited the poem by the great Hilary Teague. Hilary Teague was a Liberian poet, 19th century poet. And he then quotes a stanza from Pyramidal Hall, from Thebes, your ancestors call, retake your fame. And so, you're standing in structures, first stone structures erected by humans, and the designs that are now normal to us. Every building with a wall and a roof has Africa to thank for the design. The pyramids, the tombs, the temples, the places. And Edward Blyden in the 19th century, this African from the so-called Danish West Indies who traveled, who lived for years in Liberia, who helped set up the University of Liberia. Edward Wilmot Blyden said, if my voice could have reached every African in the world, and standing in that chamber, thinking about how Paul Robeson and Essie Robeson stood in that chamber, and how Paul Robeson sang from the opera Isis and Osiris in that chamber, thinking about Louis and Louise Armstrong in that chamber, thinking about so many people who have gone in that chamber. We've gone in that same chamber and raised the Johnson Brothers Negro National Hymn, lift every voice and sing, echoing off the walls, retake your fame. This idea that we are connected as human beings to this beautiful African contribution to human society, because it is on the continent of Africa. And you see this beautiful polyglot, this mix of humans from all over the world, and we too are in that. And Blyden is saying, this is my heritage too. In a moment when enslavement, the echoes of enslavement continue. He's in the 19th century. You can still hear the lash. The conquest of Africa, the invasion of Africa, as Sir Harry Johnson, the British invader, called it in his book of the same title, the colonization of Africa by alien races, is taking place, and Edward Blyden is standing there, an African from the Caribbean who lived in West Africa, who is now in East Africa, Northeast Africa, the Nile Valley, the pyramid, saying if my voice could have reached every African in the world. As I stood here, feelings overcame me. And so reading Wilson Moses against Yaakov Shabbat is two different versions of how these African people are grappling with the question of memory, trying to displace race, trying to engage in a process that St. Clair Drake calls Vindicationism. We're going to vindicate African people. And that's part of it. One year I actually brought the 2-volume Black Folk Here and There by the great anthropologist St. Clair Drake and reread that as we travel along the Nile. But in that process of doing this, I wanted to think about not only how we narrated ourselves, but the who that we is. Because again, we think of ourselves as African people, but again, displacing race, not thinking of ourselves as Black people. Black is a reality, a social construct that has the force of reality because we've internalized it. But getting beyond that, as you say, we see a man who narrates himself as white, sit on a stage with women who narrate themselves as Black, and excoriate them and violate them with master narratives, calling them nasty and all other kind of things, and then saying out of his addled brain that somehow he did not know that Kamala Harris was black. Well, she isn't black. She ain't Indian either, if you want to look at labels. But what you are saying is what I am going to narrate is a pure chaos narrative that will take away any force that could be used to collect people, to convene people for a common purpose that is ultimately aimed at improving the human condition. And I'm going to insert myself with something so bitter and absurd and so chaotic that my goal is to draw you into that chaos. Well, we reject that, because the first thing is dispatched with make-believe. So rather than cuss this man out or get up and walk out, should never been invited in the first place. A bitter disappointment for not only the National Association of Black Journalists leadership. I'm going to distinguish them from the student from the membership, but for those who have allowed the craft of journalism to so deteriorate that simply getting through a list of questions is considered a triumph. That's deeply unfortunate. Somehow I can't imagine Timothy Thomas Fortune and Ida Bell Wells. I can't imagine Charlotta Bass and John Russworm. I can't imagine the publishers of everything from Freedom Journal and the Anglo-African Magazine to the Chicago Defender and the Pittsburgh Courier. I cannot imagine them saying that that was the best of our craft on display on that stage in Chicago. But in that process, we have to remember that we have set standards that allow us to displace race and to reconnect memory as a way to be human in the world. So Afrotopia is grappling with that question of how Black people have done it, romanticized it sometimes, overstated the case sometimes, been bullseye on other times. History in Black is doing it from another scholar from another area of the world on the same subject, and they're arguing with each other without ever meeting each other. And I thought about that and I said, well, who is the we who is doing this narration? So not just these individuals who are writing or speaking, but the clusters of people. And that's what have made me put this book in my bag, the third of the 5 books I brought. Michael Gomez's Reversing Sale, The History of the African Diaspora. This is the second edition. The first edition, I talked to our Freedom School students when it first came out. And, you know, I think about that now and it makes me weep sometimes to think about the fact that that program continues to have to fight. That was almost 20 years ago. The first edition of this book came out in 2005. This edition came out in 2020. Shout out to Michael Antonio Gomez. But reading has become much more difficult. And by that, I mean the practice of reading has become much more difficult. Standing and talking with a sister who is a municipal judge in Memphis. She's here with her teenage son. And we were at breakfast this morning having a conversation. Beautiful young brother. Very excited. They had just come back from Ghana. She had been there with the National Lawyers Association and Black lawyers, the NBA, the National Bar Association, which is African American lawyers primarily. They had done an intensive in Ghana this summer, and her son was with her. And in fact, I was so happy to receive a gift from her, a book that was printed in Ghana by Alex Aful and Stephen Bigua, called A Cry and the Lamentations from Our Ancestors, Chronicle from Africa's Untold Stories. Again, narratives, important narratives. And he actually signed it for me and she brought it back. This was published last year, 2023. And the book is a compendium on the question of narratives. Narratives on the enslavement of African people and how those stories are told different places. Narratives on the history of Ghana and how Ghana is narrated from those Africans who created the space to those people who invaded and tried to reframe it. A narrative history of African people that goes from far antiquity to the present. And they begin, the co-authors, with, they put here on the page here, the plaque that folks will see if you ever go to, well, it was, this was in one of the, it's in one of the dungeons. And you see the narrative there. It says, in everlasting memory of the anguish of our ancestors. May those who died rest in peace. May those who return find their roots. May humanity never again perpetrate such injustice against humanity. We, the living, vow to uphold this. So the debt, this debt we owe to the past. Part of coming to Kemet allows me to sit and reflect on the months and the year that has transpired between the last time I was here and, of course, you know, the Martin Delaney ritual we had, the journeys back and forth that many of them we track into what's going on when we talk about it in class. All that's percolating in my mind. So as we were talking, the young brother had his phone, and he's, you know, he's going through his phone, and she said, we have a deal when we're on sites, when we're doing work in certain spaces, no phones. Turn the phone off or silence the phone, you know, put it on sleep mode or whatever, and leave it. In fact, leave the phone sometime. And then there is time, like here at breakfast or in other moments when it's dedicated phone time, you can scroll and play your games, do whatever, and then we move to other things. That's a very conscientious adult with a young brother she is raising, and she is helping him understand that technology isn't going away. That's the reality. But the idea that we should be shaped by the technology, that the narrative should shape us rather than us shape the narrative, is deep seated in our society. And these devices are robbing us of the capacity to sit still with language, to read and think. And so it's really refreshing. And again, he's one of, as I said, of several young people, young teenagers, late teenagers, talking about 17, 18, 19-year-olds primarily who are traveling with us. And so that book, Reversing the Sail. And then finally, of the five, and the other ones, I usually take a narrative history of ancient Egypt with me, just as, you know, as we're going through the Nile Valley, as a refresher to get the rhythm, you know, because we know the basic narratives and some of the specialized stuff, but it's always good to get a reminder. But this is the book, finally, that I think we talk about the work that I found just fascinating. And this is the book that I hadn't read before. This was published this year. It's called The Classics in Black and White: Black Colleges, Classics Education, Resistance, and Assimilation. Kenneth Goins and Eugene O'Connor. Goins is a professor emeritus at Ohio State University in the Department of African American Studies, the department that I graduated from, got my master's from. And this book is about how African people coming out of enslavement and coming into these HBCUs, these newly founded HBCUs, put in place, developed or contributed to and extended a quote unquote classics education. But by classics, they meant Greek and Roman primarily. Remember, Du Bois teaches Greek at Wilberforce when he's there, Greek and mathematics. Wilberforce being a leading school, as we talked about earlier this summer. William Sanders Scarborough and others are classicists, but by classicists, they mean European classics, or what we would call European classics, although the Greeks wouldn't have called themselves Europeans, or the Romans, but Greek and Latin. So sitting here in the Nile Valley with people who are studying the language, which distinguishes when we journey over here from a lot of times people come, all of it's very useful, but we're literally studying the language. I mean, we've transcended race. We're not talking about race. We're not arguing whether the Egyptians black or white or whatever they were. What we're saying is we have removed obstacles, talking to ancestors without interpreters. So we're studying finer points of language and the concepts behind them, the ways of knowing, the cultural meaning making, the movement in memory, to use our category, our African Studies category framework categories. And as we're doing that, we are getting insights into how these humans who lived thousands of years ago grapple with the basic questions of what we're grappling with today. The politics of how you move through a governance formation. Jacob Carruthers' very important essay published by the association in a book called Kemet and the African Worldview, when he writes about the wisdom of governance in ancient Egypt. It's one thing to talk about pharaohs and kings and queens, quite another to go into the language and talk about how do you resolve disputes? How do you build a society where everybody contributes? How do you acquire power and use that power for the common good? And what happens when you abuse power? So we're not reading Romeo and Juliet or Julius Caesar. We're not grappling with the questions raised by everything from A Christmas Carol to Beowulf. We're not grappling with everything raised from The House of the Seven Gables and James Fenimore Cooper, Last of the Mohicans, all the way through to F. Scott Fitzgerald and The Great Gatsby. No, we're going much older than that. Older than Sophocles, older than Plato, older than these various cultural contributions to world civilization that don't have Africa at the table contributing. No, so we're going so much older than that with similar questions. What happens when an official abuses his power? That's in the narrative in Kemet called The 9 Petitions of the Farmer, whose speech was good. gets knocked down by an official on the side of, by a rich man on the side of the road, complains to the official. The official then takes his stuff, beats him up. He complains to that man's superior. He keeps complaining until he gets to the perwa, the person who's in charge of managing the affairs of the whole country. The person per house, uwa, great house, great, or great house as you transpose it. The great house, the per uwa, that is incorrectly labeled king or queen by people who don't read the language, who don't translate meta nature. It's the word that we hear commonly pronounced as pharaoh. Pharaoh does not mean king, it means the great house. And when this brother, this farmer, who has petitioned 9 times to these various officials, gets to the 9th, gets to the Perwa hears this man's testimony and sends for his own writing instruments, his own papyrus and scribal writing tool. And he says, hold on, everybody slow down. I'm taking this man's testimony because this man is appealing to something that's beyond all of us, that I am beholden to as an official. This man is talking about Maat. He's talking about the concept beyond that you really can't label as one thing, although some of its characteristics are truth and justice and righteousness and reciprocity. Maat, depicted as a woman, a female, with the feather on her head. Your heart must be as light as a feather when you make transition. Have you not wronged people over your life? Or when you've wronged people, have you made amends? Have you corrected it? Have you repaired them? This is the original concepts of reparations. So when this farmer makes his petition, the 9th petition, the Perwa himself takes the note. Perwa does not mean king, because there are female Perwas, Hatshepsut. We will see the Sahu, the so-called mummy attributed to Hat. People say this is Hatshepsut. We will see her a couple of days from now in the Museum Civilization meeting. Next time we see each other next week, we will be in Luxor on the way to Aswan. And we'll talk about that in some of the places. So grappling with this, what these Africans did in the United States in the 19th century and coming into the 20th century was put a curriculum in place to train young people coming to college to study in ways that slowed them down, had them grapple with basic concepts of living in the world. And they drew upon the so-called classics, the European classics. And they did that in order to construct schools and colleges for Black students that would train us deeply in how to study and how to displace obstacles. And so sitting in the Nile Valley, I've been thinking about that a lot, because we are now faced finally with a society, a global society, but certainly in the United States, we've got it as bad as anybody, where ignorance is not only commonplace, it is exalted. It is exalted, so much so that people will consider themselves well-studied if they talk about something that people know less about than they do, with enough narrative enthusiasm that people will mistake them for experts. And a lot of what passes for expertise in the study of African people is simply discussions of race and racism. Important, but not central to our liberation. And the work is to displace those narratives. And you don't displace them by arguing with them, you displace them by pouring cleaner glasses of water. And that requires a conversation that engages in deep study, that allows you to be in conversation with these ancestors without interpreters and changing the narrative. So those are the books I'm kind of working through as we go on sites every day and have conversations every night, and draw from the people who are here with their varied experiences. And it really is, we're looking forward to a transformative time.
Sounds beautiful. What challenges you, at this stage, from 1996 to now? We're looking at almost 30 years of travel,
Mm-hmm.
right? What do you look forward to? What gets you excited about even being there?
Professor Hunter, we both know, and you juggle so many balls, you keep so much in the air. And I mean, I think about you, just incessantly, really, because that capacity comes with a great cost. And I know that costs differently than you, but I know that when people draw from you, to be replenished, it becomes more and more difficult if you're not in a space to be able to be refilled with a practice that is refilling. And we do what we need to do. And people talk about self-care, but again, the West has so thrown off our ways of knowing how to be in the world that self-care is impossible by yourself. People tell you need to withdraw. No, that's not how it works. In fact, it's the opposite. You have to be with people, but you can't let people come in and draw. They have to contribute, and that's where society, a collective society. That's why again, newbie is so important, the narrative is so important. So that question, the answer to that question has been different for me over the years. As I said, I started as an apprentice. I was here with those elders. I was happy to be in the room. I'm happy to be in the back seat of the van listening. I'm happy to be given a task. Go look this up and bring this back. I'm happy to just be in the conversation. And then one by one, as they age and become ancestors, you realize I got more responsibility now. And then you look up one day and you driving the van. So you're like, how the hell I'm driving the van? I'm looking like, who did I get to sit in the back seats? I'm looking at these young people over the years. It's like, I looked for those young people. I looked for many years. I looked on college campuses for those young people. And it was important work, but it was not the center work. And it took me decades to understand we are not going to be saved by the children at the HBCUs. They are very important. They are necessary, but they are not, should not be centered. Who has to be centered is regular people. The people who tune in to listen to you. I heard you say something the other day that I thought was just so powerful. I had to sit with it for a minute. You said, we've got listeners on Sirius XM. I know of at least one listener who is unhoused, who's housing insecure, but somehow comes up with this lifeline to listen to us every day. That creates a type of responsibility. That's somebody sitting in the car. You say you're driving the car. So I don't know how I'm going to negotiate the politics of having a place to keep my stuff from day to day. Even my body say, but I need this. And it feeds. So for me, what keeps me going, what feeds me is knowing that in the morning when we get up, we got a 5 a.m. wake up call. It's now 2:30 here a.m., which is a beautiful thing. It's beautiful to be able to take breath and be alive in the world, to be able to have that responsibility. Somebody passed on you to do this work. Because Joseph Ben Yakinen, when he first came to the Nile Valley, he couldn't sleep as an African person in the hotels, the old Cataract and Kemet. He slept in the desert. You understand? So, and I knew Joseph Ben Yakinen. So for me, it's an honor. I'm in a hotel room. Dr. Ben couldn't even sleep in the hotel. So the responsibility, what keeps me going is, man, this is a blessing. You know how blessed I am to have that responsibility. Thank you, to be trusted. So anyway, 5 o'clock, up, 6 o'clock, breakfast, 7 o'clock, we in the street. Because by 7:30, we got to be in the shadow of the pyramid. We got to go in and out of the coop. By the time the tourists coming around, we out. We moving over to our hotel. Now we going over to Kagemi. Now we going over to the Saqqara Plateau to look at the step pyramid of Zoshir and talk about Imhotep and stand in the first stone structure in the world. Then we going to Teddy and going down in the pyramid to read the pyramid text. And we're not talking just about who Teddy was. We got people, okay, some random, anybody in the group, okay, somebody start translating that. And you see, this is what Theophilo Benga and Sheikh Anta Diop dreamed of. This is what, Mary Ann Shadd Carey was writing about in the 19th century when they didn't have the tools to decipher the language. This is what Martin Delaney was grappling with by himself. He's trying to translate hieroglyphs in Ohio. And he writes a little book in 1879, The Origin of Race and Color. And so now somebody is doing that and somebody's child is in there like, I want to do that. Okay, here's how you do it. You see that glyph right there? This means that. This means that. And you just watch that. So what keeps me going is community. That's what restores us. And so when you all are there in South Carolina and those millions of ancestors who were ripped from their homes, who out of their sorrow and misery and trauma held on to their humanity and out of that created transformative ways of knowing and cultural meaning making and then language to create movement and memory to pass it on. And is now people have the ability through their hard work, effort, and their ancestors and elders to have enough physical resources to take a day or two and just sit with it. We're doing that work, and that's what allows us to do the work. So what I look forward to is the serendipity of that work. And by that, I mean the capacity of people to say, I don't know this, but I know this. And I say, yeah, I don't know that, but I know this. And well, let's talk about it. Just in the journey here, school teachers, retired school teachers, engineers, lawyers, doctors, bus drivers, people who work day labor for much of their life and then parlayed that into the capacity to actually begin to a business that they then have nurtured over there. All these people on the plane, you know so-and-so, oh, I know so, I know when so wait a minute, I went to school with so-and-so, oh, you know what, I'm from so, and then all of that reminding people that we all contribute to that knowledge. It's not a university. It's not a degree. It's I'm human in the world. Let us talk. And we've been doing this longer than any humans on the planet. We're the parents of every human in the world who has done that, and every human in the world has done that, and we realize it now. That's what keeps me.
I love it. I love it. I love you. I'm gonna
I love
pray
it.
self travels to you, all the
Mhm.
Nubians, all the young people, all of the folk that have come with a purpose. Give Tanya Pinkins a hug for me,
Always,
and Mariel Beatty and everybody else that you know that I want to give a hug to. Um,
always,
and
always. You know.
and I'll see you in a
In
couple.
fact, somebody said when we were going to plane, I said, well, you know, Karen, they're going to be doing the Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise this weekend. He said, oh, Karen's not here? They just expected you was going to be out there. Not yet. She coming, though. She coming. I
I'm
don't know how
coming.
many more times we can go without you at least
No,
showing your face.
yeah,
You got to, and yeah. And of course, the beautiful thing is to be able to listen, y'all. Again, I'm not just saying this because I'm just grateful that you have invited so many of us into the serious family and being in conversation, but being able to download this app, sitting here and listen to y'all talk every day, especially at this critical moment, not only in world history, but in the U.S. experiment, whatever it's going to turn out. Being able to do that, reminding that, yes, the satellite hits North America, but the app is global. You just sit here like, you know, we're going to win. The only question is when we're going to wake up and decide that now is the time. We're
yes,
not going to pass this on to the next generation to win.
yes.
We're going to win this generation. So
Now
I'm
is
just
the
grateful.
time.
Now
Now is
is
the
the time.
time. Yeah. No excuses. No
Yeah,
excuses.
yeah.
Love
Love
you.
you.
Safe
Yes.
travels to everybody. I'll see some of y'all on Sunday, and I'll see
Yes.
some of you
Safe
on
to you. Safe
Thursday.
travels to you too. Enjoy that. Sit with it. Convene with those ancestors like you did last year. And we'll talk. I'll be there for office hours. 8 p.m. is good time because that's
Wow.
9, 10, 12, 1, 2, 3. That's 3 a.m. So
That's
I'll
even
be
better.
sitting right here. Yes, even
All right.
better. So
Get some
talk to
rest.
you. Love
Drink
you.
some water. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Yes,
Bye-bye.
ma'am. Oh yeah, definitely. Nothing but.
Okay. All right. Love you too. Love everybody.